Good morning. Good morning, all. Welcome to the Bipartisan Policy Center. My name is Cheryl Oldham. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Human Capital Program here at BPC. We're so grateful that you all are here and to partner today with Anthropic to have a discussion about artificial intelligence and how it's transforming the economy and reshaping the future of work. At BPC, we believe America's greatest asset is its human capital, the skills, knowledge, and experience of our people. And what more relevant conversation to be having right now than to be talking about technology, in particular AI, and how it impacts our people, our labor force. While AI brings enormous opportunities, it also raises questions and poses potential challenges around workforce readiness, job shifts, economic competitiveness. And that is, in part, one of the reasons that Bipartisan Policy Center launched earlier this year the Commission on the American Workforce. Bipartisan initiative co-chaired by former governors Bill Haslam of Tennessee and Deval Patrick of Massachusetts. The goal of which is to develop a talent strategy for the nation, to strengthen our workforce, expand individual opportunity, and ensure our nation's continued competitiveness. The commission's going to work throughout the year, and we've sort of broken ourselves out into 4 working groups, and everything from K through 12 education, childcare, workforce training, post-secondary education, and pathways. And the common theme throughout all of those very diverse but interconnected topics is this issue of AI and technology and its impact on our people. Anthropic has developed a groundbreaking economic index offering new insights into how AI impacts the labor market and the global economy. And it's an index that I know will inform our commission's work and provide critical insights as we develop recommendations for policymakers throughout the year. Speaking of policymakers, we're honored to be joined this morning by Congresswoman Valerie Foushee. Congresswoman Foushee is a leading voice on AI policy, advancing smart bipartisan recommendations through her work on the bipartisan House Task Force on AI and the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. The task force's recent report provides a thoughtful roadmap on workforce, education, energy, and innovation, helping ensure AI's promise is realized responsibly. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Valerie Foushee.
Well, good morning, and thank you for that introduction. I am Congresswoman Valerie Foushee, the federal representative for North Carolina's 4th Congressional District, and it is a pleasure to be here at the Bipartisan Policy Center for today's panel on AI at work, navigating the next evolution of the labor market. Thank you to Anthropic and the Bipartisan Policy Center for hosting this discussion and for the invitation to be here with you today. Thank you. And Mr. Jack Clark, it is good to see you again as well. We find ourselves at a truly historical moment, defined by rapid advances in artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, and other breakthroughs in emerging technologies like quantum that are reshaping entire industries and redefining the way we live and work. The promise of these technologies is vast, and they promise to unlock opportunities for efficiency, wealth creation, and connectivity like never before. We also know this rapid evolution of new technologies poses critical questions and evolving societal challenges that we must address, including the risk of entrenching and perpetuating the already large disparities in access and economic opportunity that exist in our society today. So while these technologies hold immense potential for progress and prosperity, We must not allow the creation of additional barriers that widen the economic and racial wealth gap within our communities. As models continue to advance, we must make sure that the measurement and understanding of their economic impacts on communities and workers will also continue to be an important input in the development of AI systems. To that end, I am proud to represent a district that is at the forefront of researching and developing these critical technologies and in preparing the next generation to lead. Home to two NSF funded AI institutes, the Athena Institute led by Duke University and the AI Institute for Engaged Learning, a partnership between NC State and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill as lead partner, as well as the first of its kind HBCU Institute for Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Research at North Carolina Central University. As a member of the House Bipartisan AI Task Force and chair of the New Dem Coalition AI Task Force, and as a member of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, I am proud to lead efforts in Congress to broaden participation in AI research, education, and workforce development, and to ensure that the U.S. continues to lead the world on artificial intelligence. Last year, Speaker Johnson and Leader Jeffries joined together to establish the inaugural House Bipartisan AI Task Force, which I was proud to serve on alongside 23 of my colleagues in the House of Representatives. We held over 20 bipartisan member-level working sessions, engaged with over 100 experts from civil society, industry, business leaders, government officials, legal scholars, and academia, and laid out our guiding principles across 66 key findings, 89 recommendations, and 15 chapters. Throughout my time on the task force, I have been proud to champion several key priorities outlined in our report, including broadening participation in AI research, workforce development, and education, protecting civil rights and civil liberties, and assessing and understanding AI's rising environmental and energy impacts. On that note, I would like to commend Anthropic for their efforts to engage and partner with HBCUs, including North Carolina Central in my district, where they have hosted events on campus and are providing free research API access and curricular support to law, public administration, and environmental, earth, and geospatial sciences faculty. We know that AI requires access to capital and compute resources, and we have outlined through efforts like my bipartisan Expanding AI Voices Act and others how we should address the challenges in accessing AI resources that many minority-serving institutions and rural areas face. My bill will codify and expand the Expand AI program at the National Science Foundation, which supports AI capacity building projects, including at minority and rural serving institutions, HBCUs, and tribal colleges and universities, and builds partnerships between these entities and awardees of NSF's AI Research Institute ecosystem. I'm proud that the Expanding AI Voices Act passed the Science Committee unanimously last Congress, along with 11 other bipartisan bills to advance our nation's leadership in AI. In order to enhance and ensure our global competitiveness in science and technology, we must use all of the amazing talent our nation has to offer. By supporting initiatives to invest in K-12 STEM and AI education and broadening participation in AI research, we can empower the tremendous talent of our nation's MSIs, HBCUs, rural serving institutions, and TCUs. and ensure that we foster, develop, and support a diverse STEM workforce that is ready to take on the risks and benefits to society spurred by AI. The future of AI is exciting and holds immense potential for progress, but we must take proactive steps to ensure the United States remains at the forefront of its development. Ensuring responsible deployment of these technologies must be our priority. And our AI Task Force report is a critical first step towards ensuring that Congress can properly address advances in emerging technologies and maintain a thoughtful, long term vision for AI that betters our society. I was disappointed at the Speaker's decision to not continue the work of the Bipartisan AI Task Force into this Congress, and I am deeply concerned by the reports I'm seeing about how the Trump administration is utilizing technology in its first 100 days, using AI to orchestrate mass layoffs, monitor communications of federal employees, and identify which grants to cut, and using data analytics to surveil social media accounts of PhD students who disagree with this administration. We can do better, and the American people deserve better. Now, more than ever, it is imperative for Congress and the federal government to consider these fundamental questions about the critical challenges we face. We must take proactive steps toward responsible deployment of AI, ensure proper protections for consumers, and provide adequate training and support to a diverse workforce. It will take bipartisan action and collaboration, and I remain committed to working with my colleagues across the aisle. By taking decisive actions to lay out clear rules of the road, innovate, educate, and protect, we can navigate this evolving landscape and ensure that the benefits of AI are realized in a secure, equitable, and ethical manner. Thank you again, and I look forward to hearing from today's discussion.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think North Carolina is so fortunate to have you as a leader, and we as a nation are lucky to have someone who's so dedicated to science and technology and is really leading this work. So thank you so much for being here with us. Now I get to welcome the panel to the stage and introduce this, the conversation that I think comes at a really critical moment when policymakers, industry leaders, and the broader public must thoughtfully navigate AI's rapid integration into our lives and into the workplace. And so I know this is going to be a really engaging conversation led by our friend and Washington Post columnist, Heather Long. So take it away.
Thanks so much. I'm joined on the stage by three really dynamic thinkers around AI. Many of you probably know Jack Clark, the Anthropic co-founder and head of policy. Just curious, show of hands, how many of you have used Anthropic's Claude tool? Wow, that's pretty...
I love this crowd.
Yeah, you're in the right place. Next to him is John Horton, a professor at MIT's Sloan School and a recently announced member of Anthropic's Economic Advisory Council. And last but not least is Jack Mald, here from the Bipartisan Policy Center, one of the associate directors of the Human Capital Program. So apparently you need to have a name with letter J to be an expert in this subject. I have an H, so I'm going to try to keep up. Okay, let's start with the question on, I think, many people's minds. Is everyone in this room going to lose their jobs? Sort of, what do you say to people when you're at a dinner party and they look at you and say, am I going to lose my job? Are we all going to lose their jobs?
Most jobs are just going to change radically. AI is a new technology. It will change how the jobs get done. Some jobs will probably get fully automated, and the people doing them will change their jobs and kind of move up the stack, especially in coding, where we see a lot of automation today. But because coding happens within this massively expanding tech economy, people that automate their jobs in a coding context often just find a different job to do. Otherwise, it's quite hard to use AI to automate things, and also people don't have an expressed preference to. They actually prefer to just make people more powerful and kind of scaled.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think in terms of how rapid the change is, I think a lot of times people think everyone else's job is more automatable than their own. They say, oh, well, you could easily do that, but I have all these special things that I have to do, and it's hard for me to adjust. So, I think that there will be a lot of change, but work doesn't disappear with technology. Humans are number one at figuring out new things that they want, new things that they want to buy, new services they want to consume. So change is the constant. But
You think professors are pretty safe?
I have tenure, so. No, but I mean, I think more seriously, what you would see, like if you tried to map that to my job, it's like, well, I spend a lot of time, say, grading or giving kind of the same feedback. Like, are there ways that I could kind of increase my leverage, make better teaching materials, make more engaging things? And the bottleneck is often time. I think a lot of faculty have found ways to use these technologies to improve the quality or the scope of their teaching. So it's kind of that idea in a nutshell.
Makes sense. What about you, Jack? What do you tell people?
Well, I'm kind of honest with people, and I say that look, there's a lot of uncertainty. I don't have the answers. We don't know how fast AI is going to keep progressing. Some people think we could have AGI, artificial general intelligence, by 2027. Other people think that's a ridiculous prediction to make. And even if we do see a lot of automation in specific jobs, as Jack said, doesn't mean the jobs are going to disappear. They could simply transform. And we've seen with past technological disruptions, we have seen some jobs disappear, but we also see new jobs are created in that place. So I think that's like my number one message, is that there is a lot of uncertainty. And I think for my message to policymakers is that we need to design policy that accounts for that, and that is flexible and is prepared for a wide range of scenarios that could happen, including some of the worst case scenarios.
Okay, so Anthropic now puts out this economic index. I think you're trying to do it monthly. It's just launched, but so I believe there's a new post out this week.
Yeah.
Give us the top takeaways and how that informs what we've just been talking about.
Great. So at a high level, the Anthropic Economic Index is just trying to do a really basic thing, which is ask, what is AI technology actually being used for? And what is it being used for relative to the distribution of jobs in the economy? So the way we did that is we use a thing called the ONET classification, which classifies types of work, and we look at the distribution of those jobs in the American economy today and the distribution of tasks we see on our AI systems. So we have a baseline, which is what does the economy look like, and then we have how is AI being used. And what we see is AI isn't coming for truck drivers or gardeners or nurses, it's coming for coders, right? It's coming for people who do work that is highly digitized, and within those kind of jobs, the report which we released this week did a deep dive on coding, which is obviously far and away one of the most prominent uses of AI today. And what we discover is that as you get more and more expert in terms of how you use the systems, so as you bring the AI from a consumer sort of Netflix style subscription like our website Claude.ai down onto your computer into your so-called terminal where you do programming by something we produced called Claude Code, which is a product, the amount of automation you do goes way up, which is interesting. It basically tells us that as you get more and more expert in using the technology, you're more and more likely to massively automate your own job. And the results kind of show that there will be some jobs in the economy which are early adopters in AI, where we expect that those people will actually kind of aggressively automate large chunks of what they do and entirely change what their jobs look like. The other side of it is large amounts of work are going to change in the form of people using AI to just kind of ideate and think differently, and that's where we see people using our stuff on the consumer side.
And
so it's a high level.
Can you mention a few of those types of jobs beyond coding that you think could be some of the first to see that transformation?
Yeah, examples would be jobs where you're doing something that, say, you had an intern that started working for you and you had to write their onboarding project and you wrote some projects down that the intern could do, and you're traveling. So you're not actually going to see this intern for the week that they start. You've just given them this document. Those jobs get automated because what you've just done is exactly what I need to do to make an AI system productive. So if I'm working in, say, the legal profession and I'm doing certain forms of contract review, that's the kind of thing that is amenable to automation because I can write down everything which I want the person to do, and then I can hand it over to an AI system which will do it. Generally speaking, any job where I could never talk to the person and communicate with them entirely via email and everything they're doing requires reading documents or code is amenable to this form of automation. And anything which involves the person needing to have some like thorny cross-functional conversation in their organization or with other human experts is not amenable to automation and is where the person might just augment themselves.
Can I ask you, do you see those mostly as entry-level jobs that would go away? Because sometimes people worry that Gen Z is really going to be hit hard by this.
It's very funny because some of the Gen Z, or I don't want to say Gen Z jobs, some of the early career jobs, right, might be amenable to this, but there are also entirely new jobs getting created the whole time by people who've come along and have spent their entire, like, the last 3 or 4 years just using AI aggressively and know how to use it.
John, weigh in here on what you're seeing, what fascinates you from the index, and what you think it tells us about the speed of adaptation and adoption.
I think that one thing is very interesting compared to, say, what statistical agencies can collect. I mean, they have a duty to kind of get information on the entire economy. And so, at a pretty high level, you have to be pretty general. Like you can't kind of get into the micro details of what people are doing. I think with Anthropic, and hopefully other labs do similar things, is you can get really into the details of exactly how people are using it. And I think that why that matters so much is, one, you can zero in on what skills are getting sort of displaced versus augmented, which is kind of a key question. But you also can kind of get some sense of, all right, like here's this occupation, what percentage of the tasks are getting done? And I think one of the things that's kind of really striking about the report is, even though usage is widespread, there's actually very few occupations where there's a super high percentage where it's like every task is getting done. So that kind of pushes to not like occupations disappearing, but lots of occupations getting augmented. At least now. I mean, this is all caveated with, this is like what we see right at this moment, kind of holding fixed, like what does the technology look like at this state. I think one of the exciting things is if they keep doing it, we'll have a kind of a longitudinal perspective.
Yeah,
Like, what happened here, and then, okay, what do things look like a year later when model capabilities have advanced, or there's like greater understanding about how to use these tools.
So if I'm listening to you correctly, does that mean we're all going to be so much more productive? We can do a 4-day work week instead of 5?
Well, Keynes said we could take it, either by leisure or what. I mean, it's an open question. Like, what do we do with that extra productivity? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's up for us.
Maybe just to note one thing, which I think is really important. We welcome every company developing frontier models to do this index. We designed it around ONET classification because it's replicable. We designed it around a methodology that can be applied to other platforms as well. And I think a mistake that society made with social media is it didn't demand more data out of the social media platforms as they were becoming really, really, really dominant and having huge societal effects. I expect that the economic effects of this technology may end up being a really big deal. And if we can get the companies to all publish data, which can then be kind of amalgamated and give us a complete view, we have a much better chance of dealing with potentially really large scale changes.
100%. Even that does subsidize researchers, which I like. But I think that this is a really important point. I think we've kind of seen this play out with a couple of tech innovations where the data that you really needed was kind of behind a company, and any particular company didn't have strong incentives to release. But if there was either a norm or policy to say, look, we expect this kind of data to be made public, or you have to preserve privacy and do a lot of things that make it safe to do. But I think that would make a big difference in how we deal with some of these things policy-wise.
Yeah. Well, speaking of policy, Jack, let's get you back in the conversation. These questions around talent strategy that Cheryl and you are thinking about. We, of course, heard the Congresswoman bring up her desire to ensure that this doesn't turn into another technology that exacerbates wealth gaps and education and knowledge gaps in the United States. I know it's a big question, but what are you really urging policymakers in D.C. to focus on for labor market needs here?
Yeah, well, I think we have to be looking at Anthropic's research, and one thing that comes out of it is that we aren't seeing this massive displacement or elimination of jobs, but we are seeing them transform. And that's going to change the skills that people need to have in their jobs. Even if people stay within the same job, they'll need retraining and reskilling. If people are displaced into other jobs, they'll also need retraining and reskilling. And I think the bad news is that our current educational workforce system is not agile, it's not nimble, it doesn't facilitate this constant retraining and reskilling that we need. We still have this overemphasis on the 4-year degree as the primary way to learn. And I think what we need to do is we need to be elevating alternative pathways, certainly shorter term credentials that can be stackable and people can do them flexibly. I think we need to be...
And is there any hope around that's happening, the push for shorter?
Well, yeah, shorter term credentials. We did see yesterday the House Education and Workforce Committee release a reconciliation bill that does actually have a short-term Pell provision in there. So Pell grants obviously are financial aid to lower income students that currently are used for college, but they are not eligible to be used for short-term programs. So actually what we've seen in the bill yesterday, which I think is currently being marked up as we speak, is this shorter-term Pell provision that would make this Pell Grant eligible for these shorter-term programs.
Yeah.
And actually, while we're on recent developments, I think another area we need to be looking at is work-based learning and learning on the job, apprenticeships. We had an executive order last week which really does elevate apprenticeships and says we should get, I think, 1 million new apprenticeships. I don't think it mentions a time frame. But I think it's great to see the administration and Congress has noted the importance of some of these policies. And the other thing I mentioned is I don't think reskilling and retraining is everything. We also have to look at our safety nets. If we're going to see some displacement, as I think we may do eventually, we have to have robust safety nets. Our unemployment insurance system is there to provide temporary financial support to people as they become unemployed.
And I know you've written a lot about UI. Are there certain things that you would tweak to make it more amenable to this future world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the COVID pandemic really exposed the weaknesses in the UI system. So we had widespread fraud, north of $100 billion worth of fraud, according to estimates from the Government Accountability Office. We had very slow payments. We had unequal access to benefits. And so we need to have really quite urgent reform in UI. BPC released a report, I think it was last month, with some federal policy recommendations. I mean, the central area of focus really is the technology that states are using as part of their UI provision.
Yeah.
These technologies are out of date. They're very monolithic in nature, so they're very hard to update. And we need to have dedicated, consistent funding to states to actually improve their technologies and to actually counter some of these growing threats we see from criminal actors looking to steal money.
Yeah.
Those actors themselves have very powerful technologies. So we do need to be investing in our technologies, our UI system.
Jack, why don't you respond to these questions? I mean, is reskilling enough here? How do you sort of look at the landscape of what's needed?
I think it's a piece of the solution. And here I need to kind of try and represent the views of people in Silicon Valley, which sometimes sound wildly crazy in DC, where I think if you take as literal the kind of stated aspirations of these companies, Anthropic or the other ones developing powerful AI systems, we truly think this could end up being a drop-in person, a synthetic employee that can work alongside people. We don't see that today other than in a narrow like slice of coding. But if it actually happens, then I think you'd need to do everything that Jack talked about and potentially kind of more radical things. Ultimately, I think this will come down to looking at compute itself as a resource that has economic activities and sort of drives aspects of the economy around itself. Because if compute can get converted into some form of labor that has an economic impact, you might want to think about how you think about taxation policy as applied to compute. Extremely speculative and extremely early, but it's the kind of option you would want to have on the table. The other thing, and why we're doing the index, is I think all of this just starts with data and putting loads and loads of data out there so that we can have a reasonable kind of fact-based discussion about it. It probably won't be easy if we succeed at building this stuff, but it will be very exciting.
Okay, but does tax, that's a nice end. I see your smile at the end. But I mean, does tax the robots hold you back, though, from developing if that comes in too fast?
Well, the world I'm talking about is one where this technology has become so valuable that I think you're just instead thinking about how do we shape kind of not just safety nets, but things that we actually are choosing to do as a society with this huge amount of abundance and wealth that we've unlocked, in which case it's reasonable to say, oh, compute has become like a hyper-productive part of the economy that has an outsized impact. We should think about how much of that impact should then get flowed through to kind of revenues for the government, which can be applied to things that build societal infrastructure. I also think that this is not something you're going to do quickly. It's something that you'd only really do motivated based on large amounts of data showing actual disruption, which isn't here yet. But the reason we're putting this data out is that we think if you want that kind of option to be on the table, you're going to need a huge amount of data to motivate that conversation. So I think of it as a insurance policy in case we succeed wildly.
And what's your take on universal basic income or something along those lines? Do you think that will be a radical need, to use your word?
Maybe just to sound kind of pithy, I think people need something that looks more like universal basic activity than income. I think if everyone in this room got some money but didn't have something that they used to kind of derive meaning from in their lives, it wouldn't lead to stability or a thriving society. So what we actually need to think about is where are we giving people opportunities to kind of help other people grow, develop some sense of achievement. And that's going to require some amount of strengthening of our social safety net, but it'll also require thinking about labor that we wildly undercompensate today, which people have a revealed preference for being done by people, like nursing, elder care, tuition, other things like this, or types of labor which we actually just aren't doing, like rewilding large sections of nature is something that lots of people are very interested in. It's a very labor-intensive job. It's something we have no idea how to pay for today. And speaking as a former Boy Scout, it's something which young men would love to do for a bit, but we have no way of giving that as an option on the table in society. But if we unlock this abundance, we may be able to.
John, I'm curious your take on this discussion, particularly as someone who's in the classroom teaching very smart, talented young people from around the world.
And also a Boy Scout.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, these technologies are so promising that it's reasonable to talk about what we're essentially talking about is like a post-scarcity world. Like basically all our material needs are met, and I think it's exciting to talk about. I don't think we're quite there, and we're definitely not quite there yet.
We're not. Just to be clear, we're not quite there.
You're all dismissed. No, yeah, we're not there. But I think it's prudent to think about what you would do if there were signs you were heading in that direction. And I think to this Jack's point, like having a UI system that is fraud-free as much as possible and efficient. Like these are all good things to do. Thinking about what are projects we might do, in that world is totally sensible. But I think in the short run, it's paying attention to what is happening and kind of how things are adjusting. And I think for that, having lots of measurement and insight is really key. I think that's the stage that we're at.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you advise your students as someone who's very knowledgeable?
So I'm teaching at a business school, and my students are very interested in the entrepreneurial potential of these technologies. And I think what I encourage them to do, but I don't have to encourage them, this is what they want to do, is they're trying to think like, okay, now that we can do this, what is the business I can build on top of this? Or what's some service that I can offer? And I mean, I think that this is kind of plays out with any like general purpose technology. You go through this period of time where entrepreneurs figure out all the things you can do with it. What's kind of different about this is even what it can do changes rapidly. Like what you could do 2 years ago versus what you could do now is it's a different world. And so that makes it a little hard to even kind of know what the direction of this is going to be. But
And do you have a prediction of when Gen AI could be here? I know
you mean
Jack
like
brought-
artificial general intelligence?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you know, in certain domains we're already there. Like you see super intelligent outputs in some areas, and then sort of childish mistakes in others. And this is actually what makes it, I think, hard to reason about, is because you can't say like, oh, it does this, and finish that sentence shortly. Like it does some things amazingly well and other things very poorly, and it's hard to kind of form a mental model of what it can do. It makes it hard to reason about.
Well, we're about to open it up for audience questions. I'm sure there's a lot of great ones. But Jack, let me just finish with you while people are gathering their thoughts here for the audience questions. We haven't talked about K through 12 type of education. Is there any thoughts you have around what we need to do in those earlier years for training?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI literacy is absolutely paramount going forward. We need not just K through 12, throughout our lifetimes to be learning about AI. As John was saying, the capabilities of AI is changing year on year. And so we're going to have to keep learning about how we can use AI as productively as possible. And I think K through 12 is absolutely essential. Exposing people to AI as early as possible, it will become second nature to them. And I'll be quite jealous of them when they're far better than me at everything. And just to bring it back to current policy developments again, last week we saw another executive order on artificial intelligence education in K through 12. So the White House is going to start a task force on artificial intelligence education, and they're looking to promote public-private partnerships to help K through 12 AI literacy. So I hope that Anthropic and other private sector organizations are going to get involved. And I think, yeah, that's absolutely a vital area. But I would also say we need lifelong learning as well. So we need everyone to be learning about AI and how to use it.
I know you're an active user. What's the most strange or funny thing you've used AI for? Do you use it to make up bedtime stories, or I don't know?
Well, I certainly use it at work, but I also use it in my personal life. I've got a date on Sunday. Where should I go? I have actually asked that question, and yeah, I mean the possibilities are endless, really, and I'm excited to learn more about how I can use it, and I think we need to have these resources out there to help people use AI as effectively as possible.
Jump in.
One thing on education. I mean, I think in some ways it's been a disaster for assessment. Like if you're trying to give assignments and you're like, well, this is brilliant work, but it's clearly not yours. But if you want to, it's also the most remarkable patient tutor you could ever have. And so if you have people who want to learn things, kind of the knock on education is it doesn't scale that well. It's very hard to scale up. And so now we have something like a tutor in a box that we can scale infinitely. I don't know how we do that, but there's like both peril and promise there that with this technology.
Yeah, that's a good point. It really goes to what the Congresswoman was speaking to us about. All right, let's get some great audience questions. Any takers for the first one? Yes, jump in here.
Hi. Right now we're hearing from every direction the need for government. Right now we're hearing from every direction.
Oh, you need to, yeah.
Sorry.
How about now? Okay. All right. So we're hearing from many directions the need for government to provide compute. In many ways, like the NAIR, I'm sure you've heard of, or subsidies or reforms to increase energy supply needed. So can you point me towards any sort of research or some sort of path forward for compute to actually provide a net financial gain to government for this potential post-scarcity world? Thanks.
Well, there are kind of two paths here. One is compute, which is in the economy. You might end up just like treating sort of somewhat differently to other things, but if it becomes a very valuable resource. We've discussed that, so I'll put that aside. For being a net financial gain to government, this technology can make a whole bunch of things much more efficient. And I'll give you one example where we work with Novo Nordisk, who make Ozempic, and they've used our technology to cut the time it takes them to do certain forms of kind of paperwork, drug approval processes from on the order of 12 weeks to I think 3 days or so. There are a large amount of government processes which look like traversing the bureaucracy gauntlet in terms of getting a piece of paper and transforming it 8 to 12 times with people looking along the way. If we could just use compute to massively speed that up, we could deliver a faster government that would be more efficient for people. I think that would represent a huge net gain to the American people.
Yep, right here. Sorry, the microphone is coming. Give us a second.
I know that one of Anthropic's signature efforts recently has been trying to increase AI interpretability, and I wonder how that will affect the workforce. Is this a problem that we can solve to understand AI systems better, or is it a problem that we can overlook, or will it just be a constant hurdle that until we can consistently understand the thought process behind AI outputs, we will not be able to fully implement it in the workforce?
Yeah, and I'm curious for other panelists' views, but just very briefly, we see being able to trust these systems is bound up in being able to utilize them in the economy. And for certain types of work where you can just look at the outputs, like coding as an example, I can verify that the code is correct just by looking at the output. For other things like making decisions around healthcare or things around finance, where today we really care about the interpretability of the person and their institution making that decision, and AI systems are essentially poorly or uninterpretable. If we make these systems more transparent and can actually look at how they make decisions, it'll probably massively broaden the parts of the economy we can deploy them into.
I would agree. I mean, I think a lot of the interpretability stuff has been framed as a safety issue, but I think it's also like using it as a technology requires interpretability. I mean, I think, you think about every human organization, it's made up of imperfect people who sometimes do things that you don't exactly want them to do, and a lot of organizational structures are dealing with that. But we also feel like we have enough of an understanding of people and what they do that we kind of understand how they're going to act. And I think a lot of this interpretability work is trying to get to a point where yes, these models are highly capable, but like we understand why they do what they do, and we can kind of put some bounds on what kind of behavior we would expect from them.
Yeah, I would just echo what the other two panelists have said. If we understand how these models work, that increases the trust in the models. That can drive greater adoption of the models. We do see certain sectors and certain small businesses, for example, have lower adoption rates than other businesses. And I think a big part of that is some degree of hesitancy, some degree of not understanding everything about AI. So I think interpretability research certainly has an important role to play.
And just to say something pithy there, our CEO and my co-founder Dario wrote a blog about interpretability recently, and he basically said, we think this could be extremely commercially valuable. If you're one of our competitors and you don't want to see us benefit from this, you should invest more in interpretability. So we are being very clear about this.
Yeah.
Thank you for convening this really interesting discussion this morning. I've heard a lot, and particularly with the EO last week, around public-private partnerships, around the importance of that. What sort of models are you thinking about, both at a federal and a state and local level, that could really help move the needle on some of these issues?
Should we go this way?
Yeah.
Specific models, well, I have to admit, I haven't thought about this in a lot of detail. I think in terms of the actors that I'd love to see participating, I'd love to see the leading AI labs, Anthropic, OpenAI, and others playing a role. As we've seen with this economic index, these organizations have a lot of real-world, bottom-up granular data on how AI is being used. And I think they have a unique role to play in terms of how can, for example, in K through 12, what can students get from these models? And I think, of course, yeah, I mean, I think that's what I'd love to see.
And one thing I'm a fan of is using the ability of government to know things about how education and science funding works in the US to form the other side of a marketplace for us making our technology available. We have a credit program that's quite large now for giving subsidized or free access to our AI technology to academics, but we have to make a lot of decisions about how we pick them. And I think government can do a really valuable role here in filtering that and just saying, here's a resource for private sector companies are going to give away to US academia. The government could play a role in helping to provide filtering or selection for that and help us better allocate that towards the US academia. And the other part is, as has been touched on, finding ways for the US government to support the build out of compute itself, which is subsidized, because if I give my model to Dr. Horton, that's fine, but it's a refined product of compute which I have access to and he doesn't. I think just giving MIT and other institutions more computers also frees them up to do foundational research that the labs themselves might not do.
Yeah, I mean, there is a concern that some of the best work has to be done at these private companies, that US academia has kind of fallen behind. They don't have the computing resources to do this, which this isn't my area of expertise, but you could definitely see a flow of people going into private labs that maybe otherwise would have spent their time in a research university.
I think the city of Pittsburgh's actively working in this area to try to use their resources to get more computing power. Yes, I think somebody has the microphone right already.
Yeah, thank you. There seems to be a consensus among economists that if you make things more efficient, of course, new jobs will show up. The wealth has to go somewhere. Do any of you have examples of jobs that might pop up or that are likely to increase or be created as automation proceeds? And I know it's hard to nail down all of them, but what are some categories that might show up in terms of either brand new jobs or industries that have their total employment increase as a result of automation?
I mean, there's this idea of like Baumol's cost disease, that basically, you have labor flows into the unproductive sectors over time. The idea that it still takes the same number of people to perform a symphony in 1800 that it does today. I think you combine that with, it seems like the demand for a lot of in-person personal services is a normal good in the economic sense. Like as people get wealthier, they don't buy 12 TVs, they take more elaborate vacations or have personal tutors and personal chefs. And so those are things that haven't had a lot of productivity growth. So I mean, without like pinpointing like, okay, this would be the occupation that would grow, you could imagine that if you had remarkable productivity growth in lots of occupations, you would just see more flow into services that don't have big productivity increases.
I have a stereotypical zany AI job, which is not going to be a driver of like hundreds of thousands of jobs, but it's interesting that we see people who essentially have the job of like personality engineer, where you complain about how these AI systems work and respond to you, and then you bring in the personality engineer who understands how to speak AI and adapt the system into your context. For all kinds of jobs like that, which are probably small in number, but in aggregate, we're going to see something that looks like coding, but instead of coding, you're actually just talking to AI systems, emerge as a specialism, which will lead to a new type of employment within tech. And we see that today.
Great question.
Hi, I'm Joshua Gross. I'm with FGS Global, a consulting firm. I don't think I fully appreciated until this event how helpful it was to release data and then to enable folks like us to then understand this difference between job displacement and job augmentation. So wanted to first thank you for explaining that. Sometimes I think the explanation for some of these choices is so critical, and we kind of blow by it. But I'm wondering, with data only being as good as its user base, if you're concerned about what you're not seeing. If there's AI hesitancy, like we have vaccine hesitancy, I would imagine that, I encounter older people who are near retirement who kind of don't want to know about it, don't want to use it. I would imagine that teachers, certain kinds of teachers too, you mentioned K through 12, are also concerned about introducing AI into their classroom. So we have, disproportionate student populations coming into the data pool, some maybe more equipped than others to use the tool effectively in their job searches and in their research. So I'm wondering sort of, is Anthropic in particular looking to expand, to overcome this AI hesitancy in any specific demographics in the next couple of years?
Yeah, two very quick things. One, if you look at not just our system, but ones from other companies, you're probably covering on the order of, tens to 100 million Americans a month or so. I think at that point, you're probably getting a somewhat representative slice of the economy. There is missing stuff, but if you look in the aggregate, I think we might have something close to a very rough version of the picture. However, you raise a really interesting thing, which is there are areas like education where it's going to have really complicated effects. And so what we're doing is similar to coding, something we call deep dives, where we go and look at our information in a given context and try and partner with those affected, in this case universities, to study it. So I think finding a list of the areas where we're most concerned about understanding AI's impact in the world, like how it changes pedagogy, how it may change other jobs, and then getting the companies and academia to go and study that and produce data is really, really needed.
I think also that there's efforts to try to do studies that are nationally representative samples, asking everyone. So Dave Deming at Harvard Kennedy School has a survey that is attempting to measure AI usage, and it's supposed to be nationally representative. And then Alex Emas, who's a professor at University of Chicago, he's been doing some interesting work asking people how much they're using AI, and then having them also estimate how much others are using it. And they, give a much higher number for others using AI, which is kind of the telltale sign of reluctance to sort of tell the truth about how much they're using this technology. So I think that's that kind of let's try to get everyone, or understanding where there's bias in reporting, nicely complements things that are a deep dive. That yes, that this is just a particular platform, but we can really kind of drill into usage here.
Speaking of seeing like the state type of concerns, one thing you mentioned is that it's never been easier to cheat on standardized sort of assessments, and never been easier also to learn everything you could ever want to learn. So right now, the state sees very clearly distributions and achievement by standardized testing. One thing I'm kind of curious about is how you might start thinking about measuring, say, like agency, and like how that's distributed and where the gaps are, and like maybe how you might boost that particularly among like K through 12 education.
Can you say a bit more what you mean by agency in this context?
Like the drive to be curious, maybe, or to experiment, to build things?
Yeah, so how do you kind of lead the horse to water and get them to drink, sort of? I don't know. That's a good question. I'm curious if anyone else has ideas on how you encourage that. I know I was trying to teach my daughter to write better. And I gave her a Google Doc, and she wrote something, and then I put in a bunch of like careful track change edits. And then I saw she just like accept. And I was like, no, I'm not. What I'm trying to do is teach you to engage with this feedback. So we had a conversation about it. How do you scale that and get students to take that view as opposed to like a chore that they're trying to get through quickly? I don't know, but that does seem like a really first order question.
Very challenging question. And in a corporate context, I think we just do it by trying to give people a mixture of tasks, some of which we know are amenable to AI, making it go faster, and basically say, hey, if you want to get this part of your job to take way less time, you've got access to the tools to do it. Like if you are able to do that, you'll progress through your career faster because you'll be able to do more of the type of work that we can't precisely write down. But that's a very corporate way to do things.
Honestly, we were talking in the green room earlier, and it was interesting how many of us said that, a friend showing you some of these tools is what really gets you motivated and going, and there is kind of an aspect of competition that motivates us all. Yeah, oh yes, we've got a couple more minutes.
Thank you. Quick question. Very recently, I was working using GPT 4.0 with my daughter, and we were creating a book that was personalized to her. So it was text plus like some of the images that went with it. And I've never seen her so excited creating something, which was really amazing because, as an adult, I'm thinking constantly about all this sort of change that's happening. And here as a young individual who's just looking at this amazing change that's happening at her fingertips and is just amazed. On the flip side, obviously, that takes away a lot of creative jobs that are occurring, and we see that occurring as well. I guess like maybe my question would be to the 6-year-old who's looking at this future, what would be your advice in terms of meeting and what he or she should focus on? And then to the 36-year-old or 46-year-old who's been, went to, I don't know, NYU to study design, and all of a sudden they're really nervous of what's going to happen to their job, and they've taken on, $80,000 in debt. And this is, this sort of like balance of labor that we have in this country and around the world as well. And so I don't know if there's a right answer. There's no right answer, obviously, but maybe what your thoughts around that.
I have a toddler, so 2. So it all brings it home because I'm looking at her and then I'm looking at the timelines that I talk about in policy. I'm like, aha, these 2 things have an interesting relationship. My main hope and advice is generally for people to be incredibly curious and just try to use the technology in a very kind of unbounded way. And that also applies to people who are kind of mid-career, where there's never been a better time to kind of reinvent yourself because you have a technology which is like a universal tutor that can also probably massively speed up whatever your day job is so that on the side you can reinvent yourself. I actually think that's something that we see inside the company, where there are multiple people I work with who have completely changed their jobs on the order of 1 year, where now instead of coding, they are running 100 instances of our AI system for them and have actually scaled themselves as researchers or engineers, mostly because they decided to dare to be so confident that they could actually do that. And it's wild to see just how much you can accomplish if you really stick your mind to it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I always say to students or executive ed, sometimes we have technological changes and you can be excited about them, but you really can't play with them, right? When electricity came along, you could try to play with it, but you might kill yourself. What I always say is, look, these are technologies that are just completely amenable to you can play around and see what they can do and try things out. And so I think emphasizing, curiosity and play is a very legitimate recommendation. And even people like you had the example of the NYU grad. I was at NYU before. I have a friend who's an architect, and the first time we chatted, I thought I was going to get an earful about AI, like this is terrible. And he was actually a huge fan because he ended up spending a lot of time with clients who don't really know what they want, and he can throw up easy mock-ups, and then once he understands their taste, he can really use his expertise. So it wasn't a negative, even though you would think it might be just a pure substitution.
Well, I think we're out of time, but let's give a big round of applause to this team.
I'm going to close this out real quick and thank Heather and Jack and John and Jack for a great conversation. So many takeaways. I think my most, I don't know, it's all so exciting, and then you said something about a synthetic person, and I just was I don't even know where to go with that. But thank you all so much for coming, and thanks again to our panel.
Thank you.